These words that I share with you are an adaptation of the call to worship from local Louisiana clergy who led worship the first morning of General Assembly. Resist and rejoice is our call to worship wherever we're from, by resisting any system that puts one culture at the top and rejoicing in the beauty and challenges of all cultures and subcultures, by resisting economic systems that punish the underpaid and rejoicing when we earn a fair living wage, by resisting the American systems that were built to favor people who look like me at the expense of Black folks, and the further perpetuations that disenfranchise and abuse Black and brown communities, and rejoicing when our faith tries to shed light on these injustices, by resisting attempts to discredit Black people, simply asking for the recognition that their lives matter, and rejoicing in the oncoming parade of justice by acknowledging that Black lives matter, by resisting religious ideologies that teach you are depraved and should hide your true self, and rejoicing that we are all made in God's image, by resisting transphobia and rejoicing in the expression of one's identity, by opposing homophobia and rejoicing in a world where it is safe to love whomever you love, by resisting misogyny and rejoicing in the work that creates a world where women may fully manifest who they are meant to be, by resisting anti-immigration policies and rejoicing in rich cultural diversity, and by resisting a chemical industry that produces most of its pollutants in Cancer Alley, the 85-mile stretch along the Mississippi River from Baton Rouge to New Orleans, by resisting the nation's chemical industry literally built on former plantation land that continues the legacy of placing profits and production over safety and health, and rejoicing in the ways that the people of Louisiana for generations, breathing in the nation's smog, have found ways to resist the injustice. Resist and rejoice. This is our religion. To do the opposite, to resist and rejoice. Come, let us worship together.
This is an excerpt from Reverend Kimberly Johnson's homily at this year's General Assembly. How do we know what resistance is worth engaging in? Resistance that is grounded in love and blossoming out of love. That is resistance that is worth time and energy. Resistance that courts courage over safety. Resistance by itself can steer us down a narrow street that we don't want to be on. Resistance paired with love, born from love. Resistance that pushes open doors, that builds up bridges, that knocks down walls. Resistance born from love changes the world. Like love, joy is not simply affect or feeling. Joy, too, is a choice. It is a commitment. Joy is a recognition and an acknowledgement of love, even in the face of suffering and despair. So when we rejoice, we give expression to that joy, even the joy that is unspeakable, especially the joy that is unspeakable. To rejoice is to enter into a collective celebration that creates something entirely new. When we rejoice, we are birthing the strength of love that is enough to hold the entire world. When we rejoice together, we are blessing the strength of love, bringing it forth and sending it on its way.
I am Kindling Order. I have been a member of Horizon here for about 10 years. This is the only UU church I have ever been to. And this was my first General Assembly experience, so I was not quite sure what to expect. I guess I expected it to be like other conventions that I've attended in the past for my nurse recruitment career. I expected conservative attire and demeanor, somewhat boring sessions, and an exhibit hall where all the vendors are trying to sell you something. Boy, was I wrong. What I felt the minute I entered the convention center was an energy of hope and joy. There were thousands of other UU people who had similar views to myself, but who looked and acted very different from me. There were lots of colors, from skin to clothing, bright colors, long flowing skirts, many hats, and bright smiling faces. There were many hugs as people who had not seen each other in a long time came together in friendship. In sitting in the General Assembly and looking around at the hundreds of smiling faces, listening to the amazing, uplifting music, and realizing that I was part of something bigger than myself, bigger than Horizon. There were thousands of UUs there with a common cause, to treat everyone with dignity and respect. Being from a mainly white congregation, I was able to speak with many people of color about our common faith. African Americans, Indians, Hispanics, Asians, all having similar UU views. It was fantastic. I also spoke with a woman, a white teacher from a small community in Maine. They recently had their first minorities enter their community. They were refugees from another country. And she was open and honest in her struggle with acceptance of people so different, and we were able to embrace her with support. The whole process of being a delegate and voting on UU changes was fascinating. Although there were some differences of opinions, it remained respectful and professional. One amendment that was on the table was to change the wording to include the inherent worth and dignity of all beings, to include animals. Although it did not pass this time, being an animal lover myself, I was just fascinated by the process. The exhibit hall was constantly full of energy as both exhibitors and participants engaged in lively conversation regarding saving the world in many different aspects. Overall, for me, a first-timer, it was a great experience, and I look forward to attending again next year. Thank you.
My name is Marie Hansen, and like several of the others here, this was my first time to attend General Assembly. I wasn't an official delegate, so I did not have to go to all the daytime sessions, so I didn't try to overdo things, and I had free time during the day. And sort of as an aside, I visited the World War II Memorial Museum, and I highly recommend this to any of you. It's a place you really would like to visit and put on your bucket list. But a few highlights for me were the opening parade of banners, participating in a march, singing with the choir, and hearing some of the evening speakers, particularly Brian Stevenson. The evening sessions where all the delegates gathered were awesome. It's just really hard to describe the experience of being in the same room with over 4,000 other UUs. But maybe best of all was the time I got to spend with members of our own church. It helped me to get to know all of you better, and that was very meaningful to me. But I was asked to speak about the music at GA. So first of all, the general meeting sessions incorporated a lot of fun, upbeat music and helped everyone keep in high spirits, and we've tried to sing some of these songs here today. There's something about music that helps people join together to just let their spirits soar. It can be very emotional and very freeing, especially when you are such a large group of people. And just quoting a little thing from Psalm 98, "Make a joyful noise to the Lord, all the earth. Break forth into joyous song and sing praises. Sing praises to the Lord with the lyre and the sound of melody. And I think we really did do that. So I sang with the assembly choir. There were over 160 highly talented musicians. Our director was Mark Bogle, who is the director of music at First UU Church in Houston. He was very inspirational, very animated. He helped us have a lot of fun while we worked really hard together. We had only 4 practice sessions every afternoon, and then our final performance was, or only performance, was for the final session in the closing ceremonies, where we sang about 13 songs. But being on stage with such a large group and looking at such a vast audience was a powerful experience. It was really surreal. It gave me a glimpse of what singing with the Mormon Tabernacle type choir might have been like. Not that I'm saying we were like that, but it was awesome. So I attended other sessions that were music related. One was by a well-known UU singer, composer, guitarist by the name of Jim Scott, and he led us, the people attending his little workshop, through some of his own songs, and it was a lot of fun. But I also learned he hosts concerts in your home if anyone should be interested in hosting such a thing for a home party. And the other session that I wanted to mention was one called The Power of Pastoral Care, UU Compassionate Choirs. There were 3 presenters who talked about compassionate choirs at their church, and this was part of their pastoral care program. And they presented different perspectives on how to go about this. Basically, it's the idea of a small group of singers who practice together and are able to perform for people who are ill or about to have surgery to help lift up their spirits. One woman talked about being with patients in hospice, and she led a small group who would gather around a patient and sing quiet, peaceful, chant-like songs to help the patients and their families make the transition from this world, which is kind of a sweet idea. Another church had a group who got together monthly to perform at places like nursing homes or memory care facilities. And I bring this up because it's something we might want to consider doing here at Horizon. Our Horizon group also helped lead a pop-up performance of the Common Street Choir, and that was fun too. So anyway, speaking of music, I'm just putting in a quick shameless plug here to be sure to mark your calendars for September 8th and 9th and get your tickets to our dual event featuring The Music Man and the Ballad of Buzzard Spin. But anyway, back to GA. It was really a great experience. It was good fellowship combined with the wonderful culture and atmosphere and culinary delights of New Orleans, and it made for a highly rewarding experience for me.
The second reading is from a speech given at GA by Dr. Tangle E Sanyika. He's one of about 1,500 UUs who left the denomination in 1969 because of the internal contradictions of what was then called structural and institutional racism, and which we understand today and recognize as white supremacy. He came to GA to support the next generation of leaders in Black lives of Unitarian Universalism. And Dr. Sanyika said, Unitarian Universalism at its finest and at its best is an instrument to transform humanity so that it can evolve to its highest level of consciousness and potential at its best. And it must be constantly vigilant to denounce all forms of human oppression, exploitation, degradation, domination, and control in any form that it comes. UUism at its best is a transformative agent for justice and liberation and peace in the world at its best. But it can't do that if it marginalizes humanity, if it leaves anybody out at the table. You cannot fulfill that mission by being partial to some and not fair with all. Justice and equality must define you, who you are, and what you do with who you claim to be. Because it is not just saying what you believe, it is what you do with it.
My name is Cady Barnes, and I've been a member of Horizon for about 15 years, but this was also my first GA. One of my favorite parts was participating in a social justice project. When we come together to say we care about an issue, as we did this year with racism, I like to do more than attend lectures and discussions. GA models the importance of doing more, taking action by incorporating local service projects each year, and this year one organization was called Ubuntu Village. It was not actually a place, but an organization founded to support incarcerated youth and their families. Ubuntu means I am because we are. We met the founder, Ernest Johnson, a formerly incarcerated man, and some of the staff, most of whom are young men, recently released from detention or prison. We spent the first hour learning about their mission to promote healthy and thriving communities by providing programming that delivers social, economic, and transformative justice to youth and their families. I was impressed with Ubuntu Village's hands-on approach to solving problems perpetuated by the prison industrial complex. Louisiana has the highest incarceration rate in the US, and like Texas, many of the prison facilities are privately owned for-profit institutions. Oftentimes, 14-year-old youth are transported 6 hours away from family by bus because remote parishes have prison beds to fill. Due to poverty and other social problems, it becomes difficult for families to visit. Ubuntu Village helps provide transportation for family visits so youth are not isolated. The staff and volunteers step in to mentor and befriend youth who are far from home, lonely, and disconnected. Ubuntu Village holds dinners throughout the year so families can support one another and share resources. Once youth are released, Ubuntu Village helps them reintegrate into society. Because of their own experiences, the staff are uniquely positioned to search for ways to reach and empower children and parents impacted by the criminal justice system. 40 volunteers from GA signed up to visit a youth detention center with Ubuntu Village staff. We assembled care packages with toiletries and then delivered them to 48 youth, 14 to 18 years old, in a pretrial detention center. I was torn because it seemed voyeuristic to visit the facility and meet the youth. But we were introduced this way. These people are here because they care about you. They brought you a little gift. I was struck by how young the youth looked and how excited they were to open their care packages. This was a short one-time visit, a token, but showing up is a good first step. Many of you heard Reverend Laura's sermon a couple weeks ago about Brian Stevenson's work and getting proximate. And if you missed it, I encourage you to tune into Horizon's YouTube channel. It's about 20 minutes. I'm grateful that the GA organizers partnered with Ubuntu Village in New Orleans and provided this opportunity for me to get proximate.
Hi, I'm Nancy Forman. I also went to GA, and you have met Camilla, who's a part of my talk. The thing that I'm about to do, it's a role play. It grew out of a workshop I did, and some other people from Horizon did at General Assembly, in which Director UU religious educator Robin DeAngelo spoke based on her research about a common dynamic in interracial discussions on race, and that's white silence. Here's one book she's written on the subject. Part of me is more comfortable with silence.
But I speak up because it is the right thing to do.
I stay silent because it is just my personality. I rarely talk in a group.
I speak up because anti-racist action requires me to challenge my patterns and respond differently than I normally would.
I stay silent because everybody has already said what I was thinking. I don't have much to add.
I speak up because someone could take my silence to mean I disagree or I agree with the racist view.
I stay silent because I'm trying to be careful not to dominate the discussion.
I speak up because although people in power do sometimes dominate discussions, I can speak up without dominating.
I stay silent because I feel intimidated by people in this group who have power over me.
I speak up because aligning with the powerful people because it seems safer is no more okay than standing by when someone is being bullied physically.
I stay silent because I don't know much about this. I'll just listen.
I speak up because asking for clarification and being vulnerable will help me be a better ally.
I stay silent because I already know all this.
I speak up, asking others to tell their stories or asking how they feel. How can I know everything?
I stay silent because I need time to process.
I speak up because my control and composure are not as important as building trust by being vulnerable and open. I won't have this moment back. I can take this risk.
I stay silent because I don't want to be misunderstood.
I speak up because, like all humans, I'm bound to say the wrong thing sometimes, but I can admit my mistakes, and I will go on.
I stay silent because I don't want to be judged.
I speak up because fear of judgment is a powerful tool of oppression, because it keeps people complicit through silence.
I stay silent because I don't want to offend anybody.
I speak up because if I do have defensive or hostile thoughts and feelings, I need to recognize and acknowledge them openly and humbly.
These are questions a lot of UUs were asking themselves at General Assembly this year. The workshop helped me realize things I hadn't considered. It isn't people of color's responsibility to educate white people or to speak up for all of their people. Being marginalized does not automatically make a person an expert. It is my responsibility to speak up. I want to thank everyone who helped me with this script, and this is only a sample of Robin DiAngelo's research. Her work explores white racial literacy in much more depth. Thank you.
Our third reading is from Dr. Maureen Walker, whose work was quoted in a GA workshop about bridging differences. Dr. Walker says, "Empathy is not a gift to bestow. It is a disruptive experience to share. It disrupts our preferred stories of ourselves and of others, placing us outside the limits and the limitations of our own comfort zones." Dr. Walker explains that empathy is more than a feeling. It is a multi-dimensional portal to expand possibilities. The process of empathy requires radical presence. It is that presence and awareness that generates movement out of image and ready-made scripts into a real, respectful relationship. Respect is foundational to empathy. Without it, we are unable to open ourselves to the differentness and the complexities that we encounter in ourselves and in others. It is openness to differences that allow our deep structured narratives about power to shift. Otherwise, we put our own humanity and that of others at risk.
Hi, I'm Sandy Steele, and I've been here for about 11 years. This is my church community and my daughters and a number of other members of my family. When Laura asked us to speak to you today about our GA experience, I agreed, but I wasn't sure at the time what I was going to say. My daughter and I attended GA together for the second year in a row, so we both knew what to expect. There were some amazing moments, and I'll never forget them, but there were also a few unsettling moments. What I have since found out is that GA was the beginning of an unforgettable summer for me. And I want to share a few highlights of that journey with you today. First off, if you've never been to GA, there just is nothing like singing, "Come, come, whoever you are," with 4,000 other Unitarian Universalists in one hall. It's amazing. It's a feeling you just can't duplicate anyplace else. Then another highlight were the calming presence and the words from the UUA co-presidents, the Reverend Sophia Betancourt, the Reverend William G. Sinkford, and Dr. Leon Spencer, each a person of color, and they set a shining example of how love and hope and wisdom can heal. Another inspiration we talked about before was Brian Stevenson, the Ware lecturer that Laura spoke to you about a couple weeks ago. He talked about 4 things, like Cady mentioned, but being proximate was the first. He talked about changing the narrative, doing things that make us uncomfortable, and having hope. We were exhilarated by the election of the Reverend Susan Gray Frederick as our new UUA president. Her history of standing up for the oppressed in Arizona seemed to be the right fit for what our faith needed right now. The worship services special programs, you've heard about the inspirations, but I'm going to tell you about a few of what I called frustrating times. And I'll just be transparent about it. During a couple of my workshops, it came in small, stinging moments as I watched white UUs dominate the discussion, convinced that white supremacy had nothing to do with them. It felt like many older UUs were in denial and were resisting the message. The Reverend Kimberly Quinn Johnson said it really well during GA's Friday morning worship. She said, "We've been experiencing some resistance here in our faith. Perhaps you've been feeling it in your church or in your congregation, your fellowship. Resistance to how we talk about the holy. Resistance to how we worship. And the big one, resistance to the use of the term white supremacy. Sometimes when we are resisting authoritarianism, fascism, and corporate greed. Sometimes when we are resisting discomfort and inconvenience. Sometimes when we are resisting change and progress and truth. So my daughter and I left GA and hit the road with mixed feelings. After much discussion, we fell silent, and she put on some Radiolab stories in the car. We were both struck by how relevant these stories were to our GA experience. I'm just going to tell you quickly about two. We learned about how thin the safety net is for those living on the edge of poverty, how a black mother lost her home because her son got shot in his front yard, an innocent bystander in a drive-by shooting. She was evicted because her lease agreement prohibited crime on the property. I didn't know this was a thing. In the blink of an eye, this mom and her kids were living in a homeless shelter and trying to rebuild her life. Then, on the positive note, I learned about a sheriff in a southern town who's training all his officers about the sanctity of life, how community policing is creating a healthier dynamic in neighborhoods because officers know the people they serve and they're being seen as allies in the community. We got home and I began reading a book I bought at GA called Centering. It's a series of essays written by UU ministers of color describing what it's like to serve predominantly white congregations. How some felt like they couldn't be their authentic selves in their interactions because they were concerned about how they might be judged. I attended a class offered here at Horizon. It was taught by Cassie with Irila called Making Horizon and UU More Inclusive. The library was full, and I was so proud to see Horizon show up. She provided the basics about racism and created a safe place for us to explore some really hard questions. Then a few weeks later, I was up at The Point, a UU summer camp on the shore of a beautiful lake in Tulsa, Oklahoma. That's when I became a disciple of the amazing Reverend Deanna Vandiver, a community minister in New Orleans and executive director of the Center for Ethical Living and Social Justice Renewal. As the theme talk speaker, Deanna focused on undoing racism and building beloved community for all. Her daily talks were part education and all passion, followed by small group discussion. We learned about the underlying differences in our culture that consistently put people of color at a disadvantage. And she illustrated that white supremacy is like an iceberg. We easily recognize the stuff at the top, like swastikas, racial jokes, neo-Nazis, sitting above the waterline. But covert white supremacy is a huge boulder that sits below the surface in our culture and our consciousness. Racial profiling, housing discrimination, bootstrap theory, and white savior complex were a few of the many examples in that iceberg. After her second day on the podium and in her small group, I became woke. You know that. I don't know if you guys know that term. I became woke. That's what my daughter told me. This sensation was pretty overwhelming for me emotionally. I felt a call to get more involved, and I have been changed by it. Then we got back, and there was the shock of Charlottesville. But who was standing in the front line but our own UUA president, the Reverend Susan Frederick Gray. I now look back on my GA experience with a completely different set of eyes, and I can forgive the UUs that are struggling with this. It's a complex issue, and it requires a lot of open and honest discussion. We're not going to fix this overnight. Charlottesville is behind us now, but my journey isn't over. As Brian Stevenson said, we must have hope and keep up the good fight. We should try some things that make us uncomfortable, and that's a real thing. Let's work on changing the narrative to uphold truth and justice, and then let's go get proximate. Let's show up for racial justice. Thank you.